We also know that we are an aging population, so this epidemic that is heart failure is only going to continue to rise over the next 10 to 20 years. So we believe that the time is now. The time is now for us to focus on ways to change and things to do to impact the outcome of patients with heart failure. So this is the program. This is a couple of years ago. Every year our program goes away for a couple of days to review our research, to review the outcomes of our program, to make sure that we are staying on the cutting edge of managing patients. The most important person in the picture is my dog. That's Connor in the center there. And Connor always comes to the retreat to make friends. But we consider this to be part of what we do to ensure that we're really providing the best and optimal care for all of our patients. Many of you will know that in 1968, the first transplant done in Toronto was done at the Toronto Western Hospital. Unfortunately, in the 60s, transplant wasn't very successful, in large part related to rejection and problems with immune therapy. So in the modern era, after cyclosporin became developed, we know that Tyrone David and Carl Caldella, two of the physicians here at the hospital, Tyrone, the head of cardiac surgery at the PMCC, performed the first transplant in the modern era in 1985. And transplant really was the bastion for patients with advanced heart failure. When all else had been done and when there were no other options for patients, they were always considered for transplant, if you will, as a last resort. I can tell you that our transplant program is the largest in Canada, that last week we did our 567th transplant, and that our longest survivor is 25 years, and we have many survivors now that are more than 15 and more than 20 years out from the transplant. So clearly this is an incredible procedure. This is a life-saving therapy for patients with advanced heart failure. The biggest problem is that there are not enough hearts to go around for everyone who needs them, and Viv's going to just touch on that briefly. So we realized when I came here 15 years ago to the heart transplant program and the heart failure program at PMCC, we realized that we needed to look to other therapies and other options to try to manage patients. And so about 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago, this dapper man was recruited. Now, he was trained here. Viv had trained here, and he'll never forgive me for mentioning that I beat him in pool when he was the fellow. But he trained here, and then he went down to Columbia to get the experience with mechanical hearts, to bring that experience back. And about 10 years ago, he brought that experience back, and it revolutionized our program for a number of reasons. And one of the biggest reasons was that when we had patients who were very sick and dying from heart failure, and we weren't sure if a heart was going to come up in time, we had the option to put a mechanical heart in to bridge them to the transplant. And it really changed many aspects of our program and made patients much more stable by the time they came to their transplant. Well, it's not enough to have one surgeon and one physician. You really need to build a program. And so Dr. Diego Delgado was recruited. He's originally from Buenos Aires. He did his training at Rush in Chicago, and from Rush came to Toronto, did a 2-year fellowship with us as well, and then stayed on staff here and has really been an absolute key player in our program. He is my partner in crime in the clinical heart failure program. As we've grown, and we've continued to grow, we have now recruited Dr. Mike McDonald that you see there. We have an expanding research program, and I'm showing you a couple of our star researchers here in Enza and Oliver and Stella, who many people who've had a transplant know, who is one of our transplant coordinators. We've continued to expand from a research perspective with the recruitment of Dr. Phyllis Bilia, who is one of the top scientists in Canada and a clinician scientist award, and is looking at novel genes to predict the development of heart failure. Terry Yao is another surgeon brought on whose expertise is in regenerative medicine. And Dr. Cusimano, who's at the top here, who's one of our top surgeons, major focus is in education, and he's won numerous education awards. We have other researchers working with us, especially in the LVAD program, and Jane McIver is shown here, and she's won a number of awards and is currently completing her PhD with us as she works in the mechanical heart program. And of course, I can't forget Corrine, who's involved in all of our transplant workups for patients who've had VADs or for patients who get bridged to transplant with medical therapy and not with ventricular assist device. We wouldn't be where we are if it weren't for the fellows, and this is just to give you an idea of the breadth with which fellows have come to train with us, and it's been extremely exciting. Diego Delgado was one of our first international fellows, and from there we've expanded. This is where fellows have come from to date and where some of our current fellows come from. And next year, again, we have a fellow from Singapore, another fellow from Australia, and another fellow from Chile, as well as top Canadian fellows coming to train with us. And this has allowed us to continue to expand from an educational perspective and to share our approach as fellows go back to their home countries to take the information with them. In terms of the productivity, I'm incredibly proud of the team that we have, and I just want to highlight some of the top recognitions. Dr. Delgado has become internationally renowned for his work in HLA-G. HLA-G is a novel molecule that actually allows mothers not to reject their babies. Because the babies come in part from the fathers, if mothers don't reject their babies, then is there a way we can look at this molecule to prevent people from rejecting their hearts? And Dr. Delgado has been heavily involved and is publishing widely in this field and is a world leader in this. You've heard, and I will blow Dr. Rao's horn because I don't think he's going to talk about his own research, but he is an MD PhD who's done extensive work looking at the function of the cells that line all of your blood vessels called the endothelium. And he's looked at them to try to understand why transplant patients develop problems with their heart arteries and to try to understand how to protect those cells when we preserve a heart before we transplant. This is expanding into what happens to those cells in people who have a mechanical heart. And is there something that happens with the way the mechanical heart pumps that may affect the function of those cells? And he's had numerous PhD and doctoral students working with him. I commented on Dr. Bilia and the novel genes that she's been looking at, and she just had a paper accepted in one of the most renowned journals, PNAS, of which we're incredibly proud of. She's been using some of the core samples that are taken out at the time that a mechanical heart is put in order to further her research. And we're hoping to feed this back into looking at novel tools to diagnose and novel tools to treat patients and maybe prevent the development of overt heart failure. My own area of interest has been in quality of life and end-of-life care, and I've been very grateful to have the support of Jane McIver doing her PhD, of Oliver Malther doing his PhD, and of Enza DeLuca, my research associate. So I think together we have a very strong program that spans the full range from clinical research through to the basic science and then back to applying it into clinical research. And this is just an example of some of the papers over the last couple of years that have been published. There really are far too many to actually show, but just to support what you have done and allowed us to do is to continue to grow this research in the hope that we will be able to provide better care. Nonetheless, when it all comes down to it, what we're really here for is the patients. That's really what gets us up in the morning. And I think you have met, and there are many patients in the room. I think it is important to just remind you that these are patients who've been transplanted or had mechanical hearts, and this is really the reason that we do what we do and why we want to continue to do the cutting-edge work that we do here. And of course, everybody I think knows Dale. So I think when we think about where we want to go and the support that you've been able to provide for us and what we want to do moving forward, clearly the most important thing for us is that we maintain clinical excellence and excellence in patient outcomes, because that is really the reason that we're here. But we're at an academic institution, and so it is also critically important that we maintain our high academic productivity and excellence. And I can tell you that since 2006, we've had more than 120 peer-reviewed publications amongst the groups. We have independent CIHR, heart and stroke, both grants, peer-reviewed grants, and also fellowship funding for a number of our fellows. And at this moment, I'd like to recognize Dr. Carolino Alba, who has been doing a lot of the research with the mechanical heart program here and has done an amazing job and just won a very large CIHR fellowship award. We do want to continue the international reputation for fellowship and training because we believe that that is really important for our program in order to achieve global impact. And finally, in my own personal way, I do want to continue my craziness fundraising platform. And I think many of you are familiar with our trip down to the Antarctic, with the climbing Mount Vincent and the help that Dale gave me as I got critically ill on the mountain and helped me down the mountain. You may or may not have been too familiar with our trip to Nepal, where we went to Mount Mira as a fundraising. I think many of you have heard about the North Pole and the success of that trip. To stand at the North Pole, Dale was the first transplant patient to our knowledge ever, certainly the first heart transplant patient ever to stand at the North Pole. And of course, I'll have you guess where that is, but that is hopefully going to be the destination for 2012. Dr. Rao, over to you. Just one very important final word. We did a word cloud, and I would thank Enza DeLuca again for this, but we did a word cloud. These are words that mechanical heart recipients have had to say about having a mechanical heart, and I would just have you look at some of those incredible words like hero, bionic, alive, and thankful to recognize why we're here and why we do what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, and it really is amazing to be here. I must say there's a few transplant patients in the front row here, and I want to reassure you that we didn't transplant you to send you to the North Pole. You don't have to go to these things. The golf course, maybe. Yes, that's right. All right, where are we? For those of you who've come to several of these events, you might have noticed that there's a lot of science somewhat presented, and Dr. Ross and I have decided to intentionally do a very clinically oriented program today, and there are two reasons for that. One reason is, frankly, I think you would be bored by my basic science research, and I think it's a much more interesting presentation to give you. But more importantly, this is an example of one program that simply would not exist if it wasn't for you. So if it wasn't for our donors, we would never have been able to put LVAD number 1 in, and we would never have been able to get to LVAD 100. So I want to just take a moment to thank everyone who's here for their contribution to this program. I'm just going to briefly reiterate what Dr. Ross had told you. Every year in Canada, we have about 50,000 new diagnoses of congestive heart failure, and thanks to our team, 96% of these patients are very well managed with intensive medical therapy. That still leaves around 2,000 patients around the country who are in advanced stages of their heart failure that are refractory to their medical therapy, and by and large, most of these patients would do better with a heart transplant. Unfortunately, across the country, we only do about 200 heart transplants, which begs the question, what do we do for the remaining patients to bridge that gap? Ventricular assist devices, or VADs, are known by a number of different names. You might have heard them as the mechanical heart or the artificial heart. The scientific name is really the ventricular assist device. And really, they're a mechanical pump that have been designed to improve the performance of either the left or the right side of the heart, and in some circumstances, we need to support both sides of the heart. And the overall goal of these devices is to sustain the patient's blood pressure, their circulation, and most importantly, preserve their other organs, their kidneys, their liver, their lungs, and most importantly, their brain. And the various devices that we have available at TGH have been designed for either short-term support, which we define as days to week, or long-term supports, which we're now defining in terms of years. So the first question, obviously, is why should we have a VAD program at all? Initially, way back in 2000, 2001, we knew that it was no longer state-of-the-art, but it was really becoming standard of care in a transplant program to be able to intervene when you saw a critically ill patient about to die, when the technology existed for us to save that patient and to preserve their organs, preserve that patient until we can find them a suitable donor organ. So certainly the first indication for our VAD program was to support our high-risk transplant candidates until we could find them that ideal donor. As we got more experience, we realized that we could start to extend our normal criteria, go farther and go in more distances to get hearts that we'd otherwise turn down. Normally, we would never think twice about taking a heart from Vancouver or San Francisco, but knowing that we have short-term devices on our shelf, we can support those hearts and hopefully get those hearts to recover, and we've certainly done that on occasions with good success. Again, as our experience grew, we started to take on more and more complex types of conventional heart surgery, whether it's bypass surgery, whether it's left ventricular repair, whether it's mitral valve repair. Again, very, very high-risk patients, which we would normally not offer surgery, but again, having that safety net of a ventricular assist device allows us to perform surgery that might actually avoid the need for transplant in the future.